The paycheck got bigger, the pressure did not. For a week or two, it felt like the new number might finally create breathing room. Then the old tightness came back wearing slightly better clothes. So where did it go? Not the raise, you still have the raise. The money hits your account every 2 weeks just like it always has, just slightly more of it. But the breathing room you expected, the small cushion of calm between what comes in and what goes out, it never quite arrived. The number got bigger. The tight feeling stayed exactly the same. Here is what nobody has told you about that pattern. It is not a money problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is not even a spending problem in the way most people mean it. It is something older and more automatic than any of that. Something your mind built when you were young. Something it has been quietly maintaining ever since, without your permission, without your knowledge, and without any intention of stopping on its own. Most people spend their entire working life cycling through this, waiting for the next raise to finally be the one that creates distance between themselves and financial pressure. They are still waiting at 52. You have been trying to solve this with a strategy. What you are about to discover is that strategy was never the right tool. The thing running underneath your decisions about money is not rational, and once you can see it clearly, you will never spend the same way again. Chapter 1. More money has never made you richer. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen left behind the same unspoken confession. Across centuries, across continents, across languages that no longer exist, people who worked harder and earned more found themselves arriving at the end of a year with roughly the same amount they had started with. The numbers changed. The feeling did not. This is not a modern problem. It is not a personal failing. It is a pattern so consistent, so quietly repeated through human history, that it almost has the weight of a natural law. And yet almost no one names it clearly. Almost no one sits down and says, "The money grew and the life grew to eat it." You are listening right now because some part of you already suspects this has happened to you. That suspicion is correct. What you are about to hear is not a lecture about budgets or discipline. It is an explanation of the specific mechanism inside you that has been running silently in the background every time your income went up, and why understanding that mechanism is the only thing that will ever actually change the result. Here is the question that opens this chapter. Sit with it before I explain anything. Think about every raise you have ever received, every promotion, every new job, every side income that kicked in, every moment when your monthly number got larger. Now hold that beside your current net worth. Not your income, your net worth. The actual number left over when everything you own is measured against everything you owe. How far apart are those two things? How many years of raises are sitting invisibly somewhere, dissolved into a life that costs more but does not own more? That gap is what this book is about. Most people, when they first feel that gap, reach for an explanation that lets them off the hook. They say the cost of living went up. They say they had emergencies. They say they are still young and the saving comes later. All of those things may contain pieces of truth, but none of them explain the pattern with enough precision to be useful. Here is what is actually true. The gap tends to stay proportionally the same no matter what the income does. A person earning $30,000 a year with almost nothing saved becomes a person earning $70,000 a year with almost nothing saved. The dollar amounts of their purchases change. The ratio does not. Something is doing that. Something is recalibrating. Something is making sure the water always finds its own level. And if you want to break this pattern, not manage it, not white-knuckle your way through it for a quarter, but actually break it, you need to understand what that something is. Picture your actual circumstances from 3 years back, before hindsight edits it. Your income then versus your income now. Your savings then versus your savings now. Not in terms of hope or plan or what you intended. In terms of what is actually in the account, what is actually in the retirement fund, what is actually yours in a concrete and unambiguous way. If the growth in those numbers does not come close to matching the growth in what you earned, you are already living this pattern. You are already inside the mechanism without knowing it. The name for this mechanism, at least for our purposes in this book, is the income thermostat. A thermostat does one thing. It reads the current temperature, compares it to a set point, and then runs whatever process is necessary to bring the temperature back to that set point. Turn the heat up manually and the thermostat will cool the room back down. Cool it manually and the heat kicks on. The set point is the whole system's only goal. It is not interested in your preferences. It is not listening to your logic. It just restores the pre-programmed number. Your spending operates this way. You have a financial set point built from years of accumulated reference experience. It was formed by the lifestyle of the house you grew up in, by the spending patterns of the people you compared yourself to, by every purchase that made you feel like a credible and capable adult, and by every moment of restraint that made you feel deprived. That set point is not a number. It is a feeling. Specifically, it is the feeling of financial normal, the particular level of spending at which you feel neither anxious about scarcity nor guilty about excess. And your psychology, operating mostly below the level of conscious choice, works constantly to stay inside that feeling. Here is where the thermostat turns against you. When your income rises, your set point does not rise automatically. But the discomfort of having money that is not yet assigned to anything, that discomfort is real. It does not feel like freedom. It feels like incompleteness. And so, almost immediately, your spending finds ways to grow until the discomfort is gone. The car payment that now feels reasonable. The apartment that finally feels like where someone at your level should live. The dinners, the subscriptions, the wardrobe upgrade that you tell yourself you earned. Each individual decision makes sense. Taken together, they are a thermostat restoring a set point. Now let me tell you about a man named Marcus. Marcus was 26 when he got the kind of job offer that feels like proof the struggle was worth it. He had been grinding for 4 years at a salary that covered his bills and not much else. Then a new company came along with an offer that was 40% higher than what he was making. He remembered sitting in his car in the parking lot after the call, doing the math in his head. If he kept his current lifestyle and just saved the difference, he would have a real financial cushion within 18 months. He did not do that. Within 3 months, he had moved to a better apartment, reasonable, he thought, because the commute was shorter. Within 6 months, he had a car payment for the first time practical, he told himself, because the old car was unreliable. Within a year, he was eating out 4 nights a week instead of 2, had 4 streaming services instead of 1, and had added a gym membership he used occasionally, and a storage unit for things his new apartment did not have room for. None of it felt excessive. Each thing felt like a natural and reasonable adjustment for someone at his new level of life. 18 months after the best phone call of his financial life, Marcus had $200 more in savings than he had the day before he got the offer. The 40% raise had been consumed so quietly and so completely that he had not even noticed it happening. Give that a moment. $200 after 40% more income after 18 months. This is not a story about a person without discipline. Marcus was not reckless. He did not gamble, did not spiral into debt on luxury goods, did not make any single decision that anyone around him would have called irresponsible. He made a series of small, individually reasonable choices, each one guided by a subconscious calculation of what someone at his income level should have. That calculation, the thermostat, absorbed every dollar of gain before it could become wealth. The problem was never the raise. The problem was the set point. And this is the revelation that changes everything. Lifestyle inflation is not weakness. It is not laziness. It is an identity maintenance program. Your spending is not just about comfort. It is about coherence, about making the visible, external evidence of your life match the internal image of who you believe yourself to be. When the income goes up, the identity upgrades to match, and then the spending upgrades to match the identity. The gap between what you earn and what you keep does not close because the two are not actually in competition with each other. They are running on separate tracks. Income is a number. Spending is a story you tell about who you are, and you will always find a way to fund the story. This is why more money has never made you richer. Not yet. The word yet matters. The thermostat is not a permanent fixture. It is a setting. It can be changed. But it cannot be changed by earning more. That is the trap, and you have likely already proven that to yourself. It can only be changed by understanding where the set point came from, why it defends itself so effectively, and what the precise steps are to recalibrate it toward accumulation instead of expenditure. That recalibration is what the rest of this book is about. Soon, we turn toward an argument about the relationship between discipline and wealth that clashes with the familiar story. After that clicks, it changes how you act with money from that point forward. But for now, hold this single idea. The thermostat is running. It has been running every time your income changed. It is the reason the gap stays open. The first step toward closing it is simply seeing the mechanism clearly, not blaming yourself for it, not performing guilt about the past, just looking at the pattern with the calm and precise attention of someone who is finally ready to understand what has actually been happening. You have always had the means. What you have not had until now is the diagnosis. The question is not whether you have been spending your raises. The question is why your brain decided that was survival. Chapter 2. Your lifestyle knows your salary before you do. Earning more money will fix the gap between what you make and what you keep. That is what most people believe. That is what you probably believe even now, even after whatever brought you to this book. And it is wrong. Not wrong the way a miscalculation is wrong, where you adjust the numbers and arrive at the right answer. Wrong the way a map is wrong when it shows you a road that was torn down 15 years ago. You keep following it. You keep ending up lost. And you keep blaming your driving instead of the map. The belief that more income solves the saving problem is the map. This chapter is going to show you where the road actually goes. The destination is not what you expect. Now here is a question worth holding on to. If lifestyle inflation only starts after a raise arrives, why are some people already spending differently in the weeks before the new salary hits their account? Hold that question. The answer will arrive before this chapter ends, and when it does, something will click into place. The previous chapter left you with this. Your brain decided that spending your raises was survival, not luxury, not laziness, survival, which means there is a program running inside you below the level of deliberate choice. It treats a higher income not as an opportunity to build something, but as a floor you are now obligated to stand on. The program does not ask your permission. It does not announce itself. It simply begins rewriting your normal. Most people think the sequence goes like this. Raise arrives. Lifestyle expands. Gap remains. And they think the fix is discipline at step 2, catch the expansion, stop it, hold the line. But the sequence is already wrong before it starts. The expansion does not begin when the raise arrives. It begins when the raise becomes real in your mind. That could be days before the deposit. It could be weeks. The moment your nervous system registers that more money is coming, something begins shifting quietly, without ceremony, in the way you move through the world. You walk past a restaurant you always said was too expensive. This time you slow down. You do not go in yet, but you slow down. You look at the menu in the window. You do not tell yourself you are changing. You are just looking. Trevor worked in logistics management in Cincinnati. By 31, he had received 4 raises over 6 years. His base salary had climbed from $44,000 a year to just under $70,000. He was proud of that. He mentioned the number the way you mention something without technically bragging, dropping it into conversations about housing prices or car payments, watching eyebrows go up just slightly. But Trevor's net worth at 31 was lower than it had been at 26. Not because he was reckless. Not because he had a vice, a debt spiral, or a catastrophic expense. Every time his income rose, his life expanded to absorb it within 3 to 4 months. After each expansion, his new lifestyle felt exactly as tight as the old one had felt before the raise. He was buying better wine, leasing a newer car, living in a 2-bedroom instead of a 1-bedroom. By every visual measure, he was doing better. Financially, he was standing still and actually losing ground to inflation. The gap between what Trevor earned and what Trevor kept had not changed in 6 years. Only the numbers on both sides of it had grown. When a friend sat down with Trevor and walked through the math, Trevor's first response was not disbelief. It was something closer to exhaustion. Because some part of him had always known. He just never had a name for the mechanism. He thought he had a spending problem. He did not. He had an identity problem dressed in the clothes of a spending problem. There it is. That line deserves a moment. Revisit your actual circumstances from 3 years back before hindsight edits it. The apartment or house you were living in. The car you were driving. The restaurants you thought of as treats. Now think about what you earn today compared to then. If the number is higher, ask yourself one honest question. Where did the difference go? Not where you intended it to go. Where it actually went. If you cannot answer that with a specific number, that silence is information. That silence is the program running. The reason the expansion feels inevitable, the reason it felt inevitable for Trevor and feels inevitable for you, is that lifestyle at any income level becomes identity at that income level. Once your brain has encoded, this is how someone like me lives, any deviation downward registers as loss, as threat, as something that must be corrected. But here is what nobody explains, and what most financial advice skips entirely, because it sounds too psychological to be practical. The identity does not form after you spend. The identity forms during expectation. Your brain begins encoding the new normal the moment it receives credible information that more money is coming. By the time the money arrives, You are already, in some real neurological sense, a person who lives at that income level. The spending is not a choice at that point. It is maintenance. This is why discipline alone almost never holds. You are not fighting a bad habit when you fight lifestyle inflation. You are fighting a self-concept, and a self-concept under threat will win almost every time. The brain does not experience losing social or identity status as a minor inconvenience. It experiences it as danger. The income thermostat introduced in the last chapter does not just regulate what you spend. It regulates who you believe you are. This is also why the standard advice, just wait 90 days before upgrading anything when you get a raise, is incomplete. Waiting 90 days helps. It is not nothing. But if you have not addressed the identity encoding that happened the moment you accepted the offer letter, waiting 90 days is just delaying the expansion, not preventing it. The new floor is already being laid. You are just postponing the moment you step onto it. Here is something that might feel uncomfortable to hear. The version of you that exists right now has a very specific, very detailed idea of what someone earning your income should have, should drive, should wear, should live in, should eat. That idea did not come from you. You did not construct it deliberately. It arrived through years of comparison, observation, and social calibration, through watching who got respected and who got quietly looked down on in rooms you wanted to belong to. Your spending is not personal expression. Large portions of it are social positioning, running automatically in the background all the time. And this is where the answer to that earlier question finally arrives. Why were some people spending differently before the raise hit their account? Because the identity shift did not need the money to begin. It only needed the certainty. The moment the job offer was signed, or the promotion was confirmed, or the conversation with the manager ended with a number, the brain began recalculating the social position the new income would require. The spending followed. It always follows that recalculation. It is following a decision that was already made, a decision you did not consciously make, a decision the program made for you. The hope in all of this, and there is real hope, is not that you will finally find the discipline to white-knuckle your way through every temptation. That hope is fragile. It has probably already failed you more than once. The real hope is that a program can be reprogrammed, not easily, not overnight, but specifically, deliberately, with the right understanding of what the program is actually doing and why. What you are doing right now, working through these chapters, is not gathering motivation. Motivation fades. You are building a map that actually shows you where the road goes. And a person with an accurate map does not need willpower at every intersection. Trevor eventually figured out what had happened to him. Not by earning less, not by punishing himself, and not by some dramatic lifestyle reversal that lasted 3 weeks and then collapsed. He figured it out by understanding exactly where the instruction came from. Understanding the origin of the program was what allowed him to interrupt it. Once he could see the moment the encoding happened, the moment certainty arrived and identity began shifting, he had a place to intervene. The mechanism lost its invisibility. And an invisible mechanism, once seen, never fully disappears from view again. But Trevor's story raises a harder question than it answers. He could trace the mechanism once someone showed him where to look. What he could not immediately explain was how the program got installed in the first place. Not the trigger, not the spending, the original source code. How did this program get installed? Later on, we turn toward an argument about willpower and financial discipline that clashes with the familiar story. Once you grasp that turn, It changes how you act every single time a raise, bonus, or new income lands in your account. The next chapter is where the installation begins. Chapter 3. Your brain defends a standard of living. Saving more money actually gets harder the more you earn. That sounds like the complaint of someone who has never had to choose between rent and groceries. It is not. It is one of the most documented patterns in behavioral economics. It operates in you right now, whether you have noticed it or not. Understanding exactly why it happens is the only way to stop it from running your financial life like a program you never agreed to install. Here is the question that should sit with you for a few minutes before this chapter answers it fully. If more income automatically created more savings, why do so many people who earn twice what they earned 5 years ago still feel financially stuck? Hold that. The answer is not what most people assume. It does not arrive until you understand what your brain is actually doing underneath all of it. The installation the last chapter described has already begun. This is where you meet the mechanism itself, face to face, and learn its name. Your brain runs a temperature system for your lifestyle, not a metaphor, not a poetic comparison. A genuine biological regulatory process that treats your standard of living the way a thermostat treats the air in a room. When room temperature drops below the set point, the heater fires. When it rises above the set point, the air conditioning kicks in. The system does not ask whether you want to be warm. It does not pause for your opinion. It corrects, continuously and automatically, back toward the number it has been programmed to maintain. Psychologists who study this call it hedonic adaptation. The mechanism works in both directions. Give someone an unexpected windfall, and within a relatively short period, their reported happiness and their spending both return to something close to the baseline they held before. Take something away from them, and the same correction happens in reverse. They feel worse for a while. Then the system recalibrates, and they settle near where they started emotionally. The set point is extraordinarily stable. And the set point is not about emotions alone. It governs spending directly. Researchers at the University of Southern California tracked spending habits across income brackets over an extended period and found something that should unsettle you. People did not spend more because they wanted more. They spent more because their internal reference point for what a normal life costs had shifted. Spending below that reference point produced a low-grade discomfort that most people never consciously identified but consistently acted to relieve. They bought things not to feel richer but to stop feeling wrong. Think about that word. Wrong. Not greedy. Not impulsive. Wrong. Like something is slightly off. Like wearing a shirt that almost fits. That feeling is your thermostat reading the gap between your current lifestyle and the lifestyle it has registered as your norm, and dispatching a signal to close the gap. Now meet Trevor. Trevor lands a job at 26 that pays him $52,000 a year. He has been earning $38,000 for 3 years prior, and the raise feels enormous. He celebrates reasonably. He moves into a better apartment because his old one had a broken heating unit and thin walls, and he had been tolerating it for years. The new place is $600 more per month, but the relief of not being cold in February feels like a fair trade. He buys a better mattress because he read that sleep affects productivity, and he has started to care about his performance at work. He starts going to a gym with an actual sauna. Small upgrades, each of them individually defensible. 12 months later, Trevor earns more than he ever has, and he saves less per month as a percentage of his income than he did at $38,000. He is not reckless. He is not someone who buys things to show off. He is a person whose internal standard of living quietly climbed the moment his income did, and whose brain now defends that standard the way it defends his body temperature. Here is the detail that makes Trevor's pattern visible as a graph. At $38,000, Trevor's lifestyle cost him roughly $33,000 per year. He saved modestly, around $5,000. When his income jumped to $52,000, he had $14,000 in new annual income available to him. His spending rose to $48,000 within 18 months, not all at once, not dramatically. Gradually, the way a tide comes in, each individual wave unremarkable, the shoreline quietly different when you look back. Trevor's thermostat did not stay at $33,000. It reset to $48,000. The gap between what he earned and what he spent barely changed. The number got bigger. The gap stayed almost exactly the same. This is not a Trevor problem. This is what the mechanism does when left unexamined. Now pause here for a moment and do something uncomfortable. Return to the structure of your money life before these last 3 years moved with the numbers in view. Think about what your life cost then: rent, food, the way you dressed, where you ate, how you traveled or didn't travel. Then think about what your life costs now. Your income likely rose. Your spending likely rose with it. And if you are honest with yourself, the gap between what you earn and what you keep probably did not widen the way you assumed it would when you imagined earning more. That gap is the thing this book is about, not the numbers. The gap. Most people look at that gap and conclude something unflattering about their own discipline or character. They decide they are not frugal enough, not serious enough, not the kind of person who is good with money. And that self-diagnosis is not just wrong. It is strategically useless. It sends you looking for a willpower solution to what is actually a biological problem. Your thermostat does not have a moral dimension. It does not care whether you are disciplined. It does not know you are trying to save for something. It reads your environment, reads your spending history, establishes a norm, and then treats any deviation from that norm as a threat to be corrected. Deviation downward, meaning spending less than your standard, produces the same mild stress signal that a cold room produces. You feel it as deprivation. You feel it as falling behind. You feel it as something you cannot quite name, but that makes you reach, almost automatically, for the thing that closes the gap. Here is the counterintuitive release in all of this. The fact that it is biological means it is not your fault in the way you have been taught to think about fault. But it also means willpower is the wrong tool entirely. You cannot white-knuckle your way past a thermostat. Every person who has ever tried to spend less simply by wanting to spend less has discovered this firsthand, usually more than once. The deprivation signal arrives. They hold it for a while. Then it wins. And afterward they feel worse about themselves than before, which makes the next attempt even harder, because now there is shame layered on top of the original mechanism. The right tool is not discipline. It is resetting the thermostat. And resetting it requires understanding something deeper about how the set point gets established in the first place. That is where this chapter needs to go before it ends. Your brain does not calculate your standard of living from scratch every morning. It samples your recent behavior, compares it to what it has recorded as normal for someone in your social position, and uses that composite as the set point. The key word is social. The thermostat is not purely internal. It reads the people around you as data points. It monitors what people who earn what you earn, or what you think they earn, tend to have, tend to wear, tend to live in, tend to drive. And it quietly aligns your own felt sense of normal with that observed average. This is why raises are so dangerous in environments where everyone around you is also getting raises. The external reference point shifts simultaneously with your income. The thermostat has new data almost immediately. The set point climbs before you have had a chance to make a single intentional decision about it. Social comparison is not vanity. It is data collection. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, which is maintain coherence between you and your group. For most of human history, deviating too far from your group's material standard was genuinely dangerous. Being conspicuously less than your peers meant reduced status, reduced trust, reduced protection. The brain that monitored and maintained social alignment survived. You are the descendant of that brain. It is running the same program in a world where the stakes have fundamentally changed. But the program has not been updated. As this book keeps moving, we turn toward an argument about the right time to change their spending habits that clashes with the familiar story. When that point settles, it changes what you do the next time money hits your account. For now, hold this. Lifestyle is not a choice you make once and keep forever. It is a regulated state, actively maintained by a system that treats comfort and social coherence as survival priorities. Every time you earn more without deliberately interrupting that system, the system does what systems do. It uses the new resource to defend the new normal. It closes the gap between what you have and what it has decided you should have. And it is not failing. It is succeeding. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. That is the revelation that changes everything. It is also the thing that most conversations about saving money completely miss. They treat the problem as a character flaw. They prescribe habits and apps and spending trackers, none of which touch the thermostat itself, all of which get quietly overridden by it the moment life applies any pressure. The question is not whether you have a thermostat. You do. Everyone does. The question is who has been setting it. Chapter 4. Spending is how you prove who you are. The raise you got last year is already gone, not spent carelessly, not wasted on anything you would point to and call a mistake, gone in pieces so small and so reasonable that you never felt it leave. A better phone plan here, a gym membership that felt earned there, dinners at places you used to consider a treat, now just Tuesday. The numbers moved up on your pay stub, and somehow, without a single deliberate decision, the numbers moved up on your monthly outflow to match. That is not coincidence. That is a system working exactly as designed. And the design is older and more persistent than anything your employer put in your contract. What is running beneath every spending decision you make, beneath the logic and the justification, is a question your brain never stops answering. The question is not what can I afford? The question is who am I, and until you understand how your spending answers that question, the gap between what you earn and what you keep will never close. The previous chapter left you with something worth sitting with. The thermostat on your financial life has been running all along. The question is who has been setting it. Here is what most people never ask. If you did not set it, something else did. And that something else is not a number. It is not a budget. It is not even a habit in the way most people use that word. It is identity. The specific, daily, largely unconscious need to look like the person you believe yourself to be. Spending is the primary language your brain uses to make that argument to yourself and to everyone watching. Think about what happens the first week after a raise. Most people feel a genuine rush, not just relief, pride, a sense of arrival, and almost immediately, quietly, the mind begins scanning. It begins looking for the places where the current life does not yet match the new status. The car is fine, but it is a few years behind. The apartment is fine, but the neighborhood could be better. The clothes do most of the work, but there are a few gaps. None of this is greed. None of it is even conscious in the way that choosing a meal is conscious. It is the brain doing maintenance, updating the signal, making the outside match the inside story. Meet Trevor. Trevor is 31. He works in project management for a mid-sized logistics company. He is good at what he does, respected by his team, and he takes pride in that. Over 4 years, he has moved from $54,000 to $78,000 a year. That is real progress. But Trevor will tell you, if you ask him directly, that he does not feel ahead. He feels about the same, maybe slightly more anxious because the spending feels slightly harder to track than it used to. Here is what Trevor does not see. When he hit 60,000, he moved apartments, not extravagantly. 1 bedroom to a nicer 1 bedroom, slightly closer to the better part of the city. 400 more a month. Reasonable, he thought. You work hard, you live somewhere decent. When he hit 65,000, he started eating out more consistently. Not splurging, just going to the places his colleagues went. He noticed, without fully noticing, that the cheap spots felt slightly wrong. Slightly like he was signaling something he no longer wanted to signal. When he hit 70,000, he bought a car. Still used. Responsible, he said. But a specific kind of used, the kind that looks the way a $70,000 earner's car is supposed to look. He had an older car that ran fine. He sold it anyway. When he hit 74,000, he upgraded his gym. The old one was fine, but a few people at the new job mentioned theirs. He switched. When he hit 78,000, he started getting his hair cut at a different place. Same haircut, $42 instead of $18. The difference is not the haircut. The difference is the room he walks into and what that room says about the kind of person who belongs there. None of these are dramatic. Every single one has a reasonable explanation. That is the point. Now hold those 5 things in your mind and ask yourself something honest. Look at the last 18 months of your own spending. Not the big items. Those are easy to see and easy to justify. Look at the quiet ones. The upgrades you barely registered making. The places you stopped going, not because they changed, but because you did. The things you buy regularly now that you did not buy before, not because you needed them more, but because they match something you have been building. This is the mirror moment. Who is the person your spending is currently arguing for? And is that person someone you chose or someone you drifted into becoming because the people around you were becoming it too? Here is the open loop you need to carry for a while. If spending is identity, then cutting spending must feel like something. And it does. It feels like a specific, uncomfortable, socially loaded thing. We will get there. But first you need to understand why the identity connection forms in the first place, because that is where the real mechanism lives. Social identity is not a vanity. It is a survival system. For most of human history, your group was your life. To be ejected from the group was not inconvenient. It was dangerous. The brain does not distinguish between social threat and physical threat the way you might expect it to. Rejection, humiliation, being seen as lower status than you presented yourself to be, these register in regions of your brain that also handle pain. Actual pain. This is not metaphor. This is how the structure works. Now drop that ancient machinery into a modern economy where every choice you make is visible. Where the car in your driveway tells a story. Where the restaurant you tag on a Friday night is a data point others read without trying to. The pressure is constant and ambient. You do not have to be vain. You do not have to care what people think or believe you do. The system runs beneath that. This is why lifestyle inflation is not primarily a math problem. Math problems are easy to solve once you see them. You see the number, you adjust the number, done. Lifestyle inflation is an identity problem, and identity problems resist logic because logic is not the language they speak. They speak belonging. They speak rank. They speak safety and threat and who you are allowed to be in the eyes of the people whose eyes matter to you. Trevor is not frivolous. Trevor is not bad with money in any way he would recognize. Trevor is running an identity maintenance program, and it is running him. Every raise he gets, the program assesses the gap between his current signal and the signal appropriate to his new income level, and it closes it. Efficiently. Quietly. Before he has time to think about whether he wants it to. This is your thermostat. And it was set a long time before you started earning your current salary. It was set by the neighborhood you grew up in, or the one you wanted to escape to. It was set by watching how people who seemed successful moved through the world, what they drove, where they ate, how they dressed. It was set by every moment you felt the sting of not having something that people around you took for granted. That sting is data. Your brain cataloged it. And now, with more money, it is systematically closing every gap that once stung. The cruelty of this is that the sting never ends, because the reference group shifts. When you hit the income level of the people who once seemed out of reach, you are now inside that group, and a new group becomes visible above you. The comparison does not stop. The maintenance never completes. You cannot spend your way to a feeling of enough if the measuring stick is other people, because other people always include someone a step ahead. What would actually change things? Not willpower. Willpower runs on a limited supply and identity pressure runs around the clock, not a budget alone. Budgets tell you the numbers, but they do not touch the story you are telling about yourself through those numbers. What changes things is understanding the mechanism clearly enough that you can choose when to let it run and when to pull the circuit manually. You can signal identity deliberately. That is not the enemy. The enemy is signaling it unconsciously, at full cost without choosing to, toward a target that moves every time you get closer. The moment you see that the spending is the argument and not the reward, that is the moment the automatic program loses its grip. In a later section, we turn toward an argument about discipline and spending that clashes with the familiar story. After that really registers, it changes how you act, not just how you think. For now, take Trevor back. He is not the problem, the program is. And here is the thing about programs. They can be rewritten. But first you have to know you are running one. The question is not whether you are spending to signal something. You are, everyone does. The question is whether the person you are spending to prove you are is actually the person you decided to become, or just the next plausible version of whoever earns what you earn. Because if it is the second one, no raise will ever feel like enough. The gap will close, and then it will open again. And the question that follows you into every new income bracket is the same one you have always been carrying. What are you spending to prove? Chapter 5. Your friend's spending sets your thermostat. Saving more money will not fix you. That sounds like the wrong conclusion to reach 5 chapters into a book about why you keep spending every raise you get. It sounds defeatist, even cruel. But it is not a conclusion about your character. It is a statement about the order of operations. Until you understand where your spending set point comes from, every saving strategy you try will feel like holding your breath underwater. Possible for a moment. Unsustainable by design. The real force driving your financial ceiling is not your income. It is not your willpower. It is the invisible average of everyone around you. And once you see how precisely that average calibrates your behavior, the question stops being, "Why do I keep spending?" and starts being something far more interesting. Here is the question this chapter is going to hold open for a few minutes before it answers. What did you buy in the last 6 months that you did not actually want but somehow still needed? Do not answer that yet. Stay with the question. Think about a man named Trevor, 28 years old, works in marketing for a mid-size company in a city where rent is high and the restaurants are always full on Thursdays. Trevor got a raise last spring. 9%. The kind of number that feels significant when your manager says it in a conference room and feels smaller each subsequent week when you check your account. By September, Trevor had nothing extra saved. He was not careless. He was not impulsive. He was not buying things he did not want. Every purchase he made felt reasonable. The gym membership at the nicer facility near downtown, because his 2 closest friends trained there, and the early morning workouts had become the part of the week he looked forward to most. The apartment upgrade, because his lease ended and the next tier of place was what his friends described as normal for where they were in their careers. The dinners out, the weekend trips, the clothes that read a certain way in a certain kind of room. None of it felt like a decision. It felt like participation. That is the part worth slowing down for. None of it felt like a decision. Trevor did not have a spending problem in the way most people imagine that phrase. He had a calibration problem. And the dial doing the calibrating was not in his hands. There is a concept in behavioral science called reference group calibration. It is less dramatic than it sounds, and far more powerful than its name suggests. It simply means that human beings do not evaluate their choices in isolation. They evaluate them against the visible behavior of the group they most identify with. Your reference group is not everyone you know. It is not your coworkers as a category or your childhood friends as a memory. It is the specific cluster of people whose daily life is most visible to you right now. The people you eat with, travel with, text on a Tuesday afternoon. The people whose apartment you have been to, whose car you have sat in, whose vacations you have watched unfold in real time. Those people set your normal, and your normal sets your floor. Here is what makes this mechanism so difficult to detect. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like social pressure in the way that phrase usually sounds, which is external, uncomfortable, conscious. Reference group calibration feels like common sense. It feels like knowing what things cost. It feels like having standards or taste or basic self-respect. When Trevor signed a lease on the slightly nicer apartment, he was not thinking about his friends. He was thinking about what felt right for someone at his stage of life. But who taught him what right looked like at his stage of life? The people at his stage of life who were visible to him. The math was always invisible. The conclusion always felt personal. This is the gap that never closes. Income rises. The reference group updates. Spending follows. The gap between what you earn and what you keep remains constant, not because you are irresponsible, but because the thermostat is being set from outside, not inside. Call up your actual circumstances from 3 years back before hindsight edits it. Not emotionally, not professionally, financially. Think about the specific number you needed each month to feel okay. The rent or mortgage, the food, the going out, the things you bought yourself. Now think about the number you need today to feel the same level of okay. Chances are that second number is meaningfully higher. And chances are the increase does not feel like extravagance. It feels like the natural cost of your life as it actually is. That feeling is not wrong. The costs are real. The question is where the costs came from, because most of the distance between those two numbers was not driven by what you genuinely needed to be comfortable. Most of it was driven by what the people around you made normal. Let one uncomfortable possibility sit for a moment. Your reference group has been managing your finances longer than you have, not through conspiracy, not through any intention on their part, simply through visibility. Every choice they make that you can see gets quietly filed by your brain as data. That is the kind of car someone like me drives. That is the kind of place someone at my level lives. That is what a normal vacation looks like. Your brain is not lazy for doing this. It is efficient. Humans have always calibrated status behavior against the group, because for most of human history, being out of step with the group was genuinely dangerous. Falling too far below the visible standard risked exclusion. Exclusion once meant something much worse than an awkward dinner. So the brain built a program to prevent it. That program is still running, and it is running on your salary. Marcus graduated the same year as his 3 closest friends. All 4 of them landed decent first jobs in the same city. For the first 2 years, they lived within blocks of each other in small apartments and split checks at cheap places without thinking twice. Then Marcus's friends each took different paths. 2 took jobs in finance. 1 started a company that got a small round of funding. Marcus stayed in his original field, doing work he believed in, earning a salary that grew steadily but not dramatically. By 30, his friends were spending at a level that Marcus's income could not realistically match. But he did not step back from the group. He leaned in. He found ways to cover the dinners, the trips, the bottles at the table. He used his credit card as a bridge. He told himself it was temporary, that he was close to a promotion, that next year would be different. 5 years passed. The debt compounded. The promotion came and the debt absorbed it. Marcus was not weak. He was running the reference group program at full speed, and the program did not care what was in his account. What Marcus experienced was not a failure of discipline. It was a feature of a social survival program that had no off switch, which brings you back to that question you have been holding. What did you buy in the last 6 months that you did not actually want but somehow still needed? Not needed to survive, needed to remain a recognizable version of yourself to the people who know you, needed to stay in the frame, needed to not be the one who doesn't come, who doesn't have it, who isn't there anymore. That spending is not vanity. Call it vanity and you will misdiagnose yourself every time. Vanity is about wanting to look good. This is about something older and more serious. This is a social survival program, and it has been spending your raises before you even know they have arrived. Here is where hope enters, because it does enter. The mechanism is not a moral failing, which means it is not fixed by moral effort. You do not need to become more disciplined or more grateful or less materialistic. You need to understand that the thermostat has been set by an external hand, and that external hands can be replaced by yours, not all at once, not through willpower, through something more structural. The first structural truth is this: proximity drives calibration. The people you are closest to most frequently determine your floor. This is not an argument to abandon your friends or to only surround yourself with people who earn more and save more. That advice exists, and it contains a grain of truth wrapped inside a socially destructive instruction. The real implication is softer and more actionable. You need to become intentional about what you use as your reference point for normal, not as a performance, as a decision, because here is what most people never do. They let the reference group be chosen by circumstance, by who they went to school with, who they happen to meet, who lives in the same neighborhood. And then they spend a decade being calibrated by that accident. The people who build real financial distance between where they started and where they end up are not usually earning dramatically more than their peers. They have simply, at some point, chosen a different comparison. They started measuring their progress against a standard they set deliberately. They made the invisible dial visible, and then they turned it. Before long, we turned toward an argument about how income level determines financial outcome that clashes with the familiar story. Once that becomes real to you, it changes how you act on every future raise. But for now, stay here. Stay with Trevor, who got his 9% raise and spent it before fall. Stay with Marcus, who loved his friends and let that love cost him 5 years. Stay with your own version of that question, not what you bought. Who decided that buying it was the obvious thing to do? Keeping up is not vanity. It is a social survival program that will spend every dollar you earn before wealth building can begin. And the first step to turning the dial is knowing who has been holding it. What would your finances look like if you had never been able to see what your friends were spending? Chapter 6. The raise announcement activates the spending program. That raise you got last year already cost you more than it paid you. Not as a metaphor, as math. Take whatever your raise was, the dollar amount on the letter, the number your manager said out loud, and ask yourself how much of that difference currently sits in a savings account, an investment, a retirement fund, anything that grows over time. For most people listening right now, the honest answer is almost none of it, maybe none at all. And the quiet horror of that fact is not that the money is gone. It is that the money kept arriving, every 2 weeks, for the entire year, and it still disappeared. Something consumed it before you could make a decision about it. Something faster than your intentions, older than your discipline, and completely invisible to your daily awareness. That something has a mechanism, a sequence, a trigger. Understanding it is the only way to stop it from eating the next raise too. Here is the question this chapter is going to answer. Where exactly does the money go, and when exactly is the decision made? Hold that question. You will need it. Bring to mind your actual circumstances from 3 years back before hindsight edits it. Not conceptually, actually pause and go back there. The apartment or the house, the car in the driveway or the subway card in your pocket, the restaurants you could afford, the ones you walked past. Think about what felt like enough back then. Think about what felt like a stretch. Most people, when they do this honestly, realize something uncomfortable. They were fine, they had enough. They were making it work. And then income grew, and somehow the feeling of enough never returned. It just kept moving forward like a finish line does for a runner who will never catch it. That gap between what you earn and what feels like enough is the engine of this whole book. In this chapter, you are going to see the exact moment it is widened. First, you need to meet Trevor. Trevor is 31. He works in logistics management at a mid-sized distribution company outside Columbus. By any reasonable measure, he is a responsible adult. He pays his bills on time. He has a credit score he is proud of. He is not impulsive. He does not feel reckless. In November of a year that had been financially difficult, his manager called him into a glass-walled conference room and told him he was getting a raise, 11%. For Trevor, that was roughly $410 more per month before taxes, about $280 after. Trevor felt good. He deserved this. He had worked for it. He walked back to his desk and within 90 seconds opened a browser tab. He did not open a savings calculator. He did not open his bank account. He opened a review page for a standing desk he had been watching for 4 months. He had held off because the timing was not right. Now the timing was right. He closed the laptop and went home. And over the next 72 hours, something systematic happened. That evening over dinner, Trevor told his girlfriend about the raise. She smiled. He smiled. They decided loosely that they could probably look at moving to a better apartment when their lease came up in March. Nothing decided, just a thought, but the thought had been spoken. The next morning, Trevor pulled into the parking lot at work and noticed for the first time in months that his car made a small sound when he turned right. He had noticed it before and dismissed it. Now he thought, I should probably get that looked at. And while I am getting it looked at, maybe it is time to think about whether this car still makes sense. That afternoon, he texted 2 friends about getting dinner on Friday. His previous Friday dinner budget was roughly $30. He suggested a place that ran closer to $50. None of these decisions felt like decisions. That is the thing you have to understand about what happened to Trevor. He did not sit down and make a list. He did not consciously say, I now have more money and therefore I will spend more money. The spending program was running without his participation. The raise had been announced. The identity update had been processed. The queue was already filling. By Sunday evening, before a single dollar of his new salary had hit his account, Trevor had mentally committed to a standing desk, a possible car replacement, a new apartment at a higher price point, and a slightly elevated social life. Every one of those things had a monthly cost. Added together, they exceeded his after-tax raise by a factor of roughly 4. His income had gone up $280 per month. His future expenses had gone up more than $1,000. He did not know this. He had done no math, no spreadsheet, no budget adjustment. The program had run in the background and he had simply followed it, the way you follow a song you know by heart without realizing you are singing. What triggered it? Not the money. That is the revelation this chapter is built on. It is worth saying twice, because it contradicts almost everything you have been told about how financial decisions work. Not the money. The trigger was the identity update. The moment Trevor's manager said the words, the moment the raise became real and social, meaning someone else knew about it, Trevor's internal sense of who he was shifted slightly upward. Not dramatically, not egotistically, quietly. The way a thermostat clicks 1 degree higher. He was now a person who earned this much. And a person who earns this much lives a certain way, owns certain things, eats at certain places, drives a certain kind of car. That mapping, income to identity to lifestyle, happened automatically in seconds, without a single conscious thought. The spending did not follow the money. The spending followed the story. This is why raises almost never build wealth. Not because people are careless, not because they lack discipline in the traditional sense, but because the lifestyle identity update runs first, runs faster, and runs completely below the level of conscious decision-making. By the time the first new paycheck arrives, the spending decisions are already made. They are in queue, waiting to be executed. Think about the last raise you received, or the last meaningful income increase of any kind. Think about what happened in the first week after you found out. Did you buy something you had been holding off on? Did you have a conversation about moving or upgrading something, or finally doing the thing you had been telling yourself you could not afford? You probably did, and it probably did not feel like a decision. It felt like a natural next step, like something that had been waiting to happen and now had permission. That permission was the identity update. Here is what makes this particularly costly, and this is the part that most personal finance conversations never reach. The identity update does not correspond to the actual new income. It corresponds to what that income signals about who you are becoming. Trevor did not think, I have $280 more per month. He thought, without thinking, I am the kind of person who is moving up, and people who are moving up live slightly ahead of where they currently are. Because that is what moving up looks like to them and to everyone watching. The social dimension of this cannot be overstated. When Trevor told his girlfriend about the raise over dinner, he was not just sharing financial news. He was announcing an identity update to his closest witness. She reflected it back. The new lifestyle expectations became a shared project. Now stepping back from the standing desk or the nicer apartment would not feel like financial discipline. It would feel like a retreat from who they had both just agreed he was becoming. The trap has walls now. And here is where the time dimension makes everything worse. Trevor will get another raise, maybe in 18 months. The same program will run again. The identity will update again. The queue will fill again. Each time it runs, the baseline lifts a little higher. The thermostat notches up, and the gap between what he earns and what feels like enough never closes. It just chases the ceiling at exactly the same pace that the ceiling rises. Down the line in this book, we turn toward an argument about motivation and money, specifically about why earning more should naturally produce better financial outcomes that clashes with the familiar story. When that idea snaps into focus, it changes how you act the moment any income increase arrives. For now, understand this. The program is not malicious. It is not a flaw in you. It is a feature of how human beings use money to communicate belonging and status, to themselves as much as to anyone else. The identity update is a social survival mechanism wearing a financial costume. It kept your ancestors in the right tribe. It is just catastrophically mismatched with the goal of building wealth in the modern economy, where the tribe is visible at all times, the signals are everywhere, and the spending options are infinite. The money you are not accumulating right now is not being wasted carelessly. It is being invested in a story about who you are. That story costs you every single month and pays you nothing, which brings you back to the question opened at the start of this chapter. Where exactly does the money go, and when exactly is the decision made? The decision is made the moment you hear your own raise announced. The money follows a story that was already written before the first dollar arrived. The only question worth asking now is who wrote that story, and whether you are ready to write a different one. Chapter 7. Wealth is built in the gap you keep closing. Saving money does not build wealth. That sounds like the kind of reckless claim that gets laughed out of every personal finance conversation you have ever sat through. But stay with it. The statement is precise. Saving money, the act itself, the putting away of dollars into an account, is not what builds wealth. What builds wealth is the gap between what comes in and what goes out. Saving is only one half of that equation. The half most people ignore is what happens on the spending side every single time their income rises. You have probably been told to save more. You have probably never been told, clearly and directly, that every lifestyle upgrade you make is not a reward for your progress. It is a wall being built across the only corridor wealth can travel through. That corridor is the gap. Once you understand what closes it and how automatically it closes without your permission, you will never look at a raise the same way again. Now, the chapter you just finished ended with a question. Who wrote the story you have been living inside and whether you are ready to write a different one? This chapter gives you the mechanism, not the motivation, the actual mechanical answer to how a different story gets built, dollar by dollar, month by month, year by year. The mechanism is the gap, and almost no one keeps it. Here is something to sit with before we go further. Travel back to 3 years ago before memory softens it, not emotionally, not professionally, but financially. Think about what you were spending each month back then on rent, on food, on the subscriptions and the going out, and the things you told yourself you needed. Now think about what you earn today versus what you earned then. If your income went up by even 20% over those 3 years, ask yourself this: did your savings rate go up by 20% too? Or did something else absorb that extra income before you ever really decided what to do with it? Most people who sit honestly with that question feel a particular kind of discomfort. Not guilt, something quieter. The realization that the money came and then it was simply gone and they could not tell you exactly where. That disappearance has a name. It is lifestyle inflation, and it works like a river that narrows. Picture it this way. When your income rises, the river of money flowing through your life gets wider. More water, more volume, more possibility. The gap between what comes in and what goes out could widen with it. That is the version of the story where wealth grows. But lifestyle inflation works in the opposite direction. It builds banks on both sides of the river simultaneously. As the water volume increases, the channel stays the same width or narrows. The water moves faster, looks more impressive, feels like more. But the gap that could carry accumulated wealth downstream never actually opens. The water just rushes through and exits. The exit points are not random. They are chosen. But they are chosen below the level of conscious decision, which is precisely what makes them so hard to interrupt. There is a man named Trevor, and his story is not dramatic. That is the point. Trevor worked in logistics coordination for a regional distribution company. At 24, he earned $42,000 a year. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment for $800 a month, drove a 6-year-old Civic with 212,000 miles on it, and spent roughly $1,800 a month on everything combined. That left him with roughly $1,700 each month that could have become the gap. He did not keep it. He was 24, and the gaps in his life felt social, not financial. He wanted to eat out more, go to the concerts, buy the better shoes. So the $1,700 largely dissolved. He was not irresponsible by any observable standard. He was just human. By 29, Trevor earned $68,000. The raise had come in 3 increments over 5 years. Each time he got one, he upgraded something: a newer car payment, a bigger apartment, a food delivery habit that had calcified from occasional treat to daily routine. His monthly spending was now $3,600. He was taking home roughly $4,100 after tax. The gap was $500 a month. 5 years of income growth, and the gap was $500. Here is the number that matters. If Trevor had kept his spending at the 24-year-old level, not frozen it, just grown it slowly, at half the rate of his income growth, his gap at 29 would have been closer to $2,000 a month. Over 5 years, even invested conservatively, the difference compounds to something in the neighborhood of $160,000. Trevor had not built that. He had built a lifestyle that required his current income to sustain itself. The moment the income stopped, the lifestyle would collapse within 90 days. Trevor's situation is not a failure story. It is the default story. The default story runs like this: income rises, identity rises with it, and spending is the physical expression of the new identity. The car you drive tells people what bracket you are in. The neighborhood you live in signals your status. The restaurants you go to, the brands you wear, the phone in your hand, each of these is a piece of the identity you are constructing and maintaining in real time. This is not vanity. It is deeply human social behavior, but it is running as an automatic program, not a deliberate choice. Every time you get a raise, the program receives a signal. The signal says, you are now someone who earns more, and someone who earns more lives differently. The program responds before you consciously decide anything. Suddenly, the old apartment feels a little too small. The old car feels a little too embarrassing. The old restaurant feels a little beneath where you are now. This is the income thermostat recalibrating. In the early chapters of this book, you met the thermostat as the enemy, the mechanism that brings your spending up to meet your income so automatically that you barely notice the temperature change. Here, at Chapter 7, you are looking at the exact moment the thermostat fires, not in abstract. In real time, the moment the raise lands or the bonus hits or the new contract is signed, that is the moment the thermostat reads the new temperature and begins bringing your spending up to match it. You are not consciously deciding to spend more. The thermostat is deciding for you, and the gap closes. What would it look like to intercept that process? Not to deny yourself everything, not to live like you are 22 forever, but to make a deliberate choice about how much of the new income flows into the gap and how much flows into identity maintenance. The answer is not a percentage. The answer is a decision made at the specific moment the income changes, before the spending adjusts to fill the space. This is the principle that most financial advice skips over. Most financial advice treats budgeting as a math problem. You subtract expenses from income and call what remains savings. But that framework assumes expenses are relatively fixed. They are not. Expenses are elastic. They expand toward whatever income is available because the identity program requires them to. The math problem only works if you intercept the elasticity. If you set a boundary at the moment of increase and say, this portion of the new income does not go into lifestyle. It goes into the gap, and the gap is held open. A little later, you will hear a point about discipline and financial behavior that clashes with the familiar story. Once that lands, it shifts how you actually make decisions in the moment a raise arrives. But right now, here is what is already true and already useful. Wealth is not an amount sitting in an account. Wealth is a gap that is actively maintained against the continuous pressure of lifestyle inflation. The pressure is not occasional. It is constant. Every social signal you receive, every advertisement you absorb, every colleague who gets the new thing, all of it pushes on the gap, trying to close it. And the gap does not close all at once. It closes incrementally, one small upgrade at a time, each one feeling completely reasonable in isolation, each one slightly narrowing the corridor that wealth needs to move through. This is why people with high incomes feel financially stuck, not because they are spending foolishly, because they are spending proportionally, which is exactly what the identity maintenance program demands, and which is exactly what eliminates the gap as income grows. The open question, the one worth carrying through the rest of this chapter, and it was planted at the beginning, even if you did not notice it, is this. If the gap is not an amount but a ratio, and if lifestyle inflation is a constant pressure that closes the ratio automatically, what is the actual mechanism for holding it open? Not willpower, not budgeting apps, something more structural. It has to do with how you decide who you are before the money arrives, not after. The people who hold the gap do not do it by wanting to save more than they want to spend. They do it by deciding in advance, with specificity, what the new income is for. They write the allocation before the deposit clears. They treat the gap as a prior obligation not to a bank but to the version of themselves they have already decided to become. The spending happens after the gap is funded, not before. This one structural inversion changes everything. When spending is what remains after the gap is protected, the identity program still runs, but it runs on a smaller budget. The gap survives. Trevor never made that inversion. He spent, and then he looked at what was left. What was left was always nearly nothing because the program had already used it. You do not have to be Trevor, but you have to interrupt the sequence, before the next raise, before the next bonus, before the next time income changes and the thermostat fires. The gap is always available. The question is whether you claim it first, or let the automatic program claim it for you. Wealth is not what you earn. Wealth is what the gap between your income and your spending has time to become. Chapter 8. The first 48 hours after a raise are critical. Right now, money is leaving you in a way you cannot see on any bank statement. It is not an overdraft. It is not a bad purchase you made last Tuesday. It is the gap that never opens. Every time your income rises and your spending matches it within days, sometimes within hours, the distance between what you earn and what you keep collapses back to nearly zero. And that collapse is not random. It is not careless. It is timed. The mechanism that drives your spending upward after every raise is working on a clock. The clock starts the moment you find out your pay has increased. What happens inside that window determines whether the raise builds anything or disappears entirely. The compounding cost is not just the money spent. It is every month afterward that you could have been investing the difference but weren't. It is the version of your financial life that never gets a chance to exist. This chapter is about that window, and about what you can do inside it before the mechanism wins. That last chapter left you with something true and a little uncomfortable. Wealth is not what you earn. Wealth is what the gap between your income and your spending has time to become. Sit with that for a moment. If the gap never opens, if every raise is swallowed by a corresponding rise in what your life costs, then time has nothing to work with. The most powerful force in personal finance is not discipline. It is not income. It is time applied to a gap. And right now, somewhere in your life, that gap is being closed before time ever gets a chance to touch it. There is one question underneath this section through everything that follows. Why do people who know exactly what lifestyle inflation is, people who have read about it, thought about it, told their friends to watch out for it, still fall into it every single time their income goes up? Knowledge is not protection. Understanding the trap does not spring it. Something else is required. Something that works on a different level than awareness. We will get to that. But first, you need to understand what is actually happening in the hours after a raise. Picture the moment you find out. Maybe it is an email from HR. Maybe your manager pulls you aside after a meeting. Maybe you open a pay stub and the number is higher than last month and you have to read it twice. Something happens in your body in that instant. A small charge. Relief, maybe, or a particular kind of excitement that feels like permission. That feeling is real, and it is also the starting gun for a process that has nothing to do with your conscious intentions. Your brain begins updating its model of who you are. This is not metaphor. Psychologists who study self-concept change have found that identity updates follow income signals closely and quickly. Within hours of receiving news of a raise, people begin mentally categorizing themselves differently. Not dramatically, subtly. The person who drove the older car begins to imagine the newer one not as a fantasy, but as a reasonable expectation. The person who bought lunch from the cheaper place starts feeling that the nicer place is now appropriate. These are not decisions being made. They are identity adjustments running automatically, and they produce decisions that feel completely logical and earned. This is the thermostat working in real time. The setting is being adjusted upward, and once the new setting is locked in, every spending behavior that follows feels like maintenance, not indulgence. You are not being reckless. You are being consistent with who you now believe yourself to be. The window of vulnerability is roughly 48 hours. This is not an arbitrary number. It reflects how long the identity update takes to move from a fluid, interruptible state into something more fixed. In the first few hours, the new income information is exciting but not yet integrated. The self-concept is still loose. Spending decisions made in this window are genuinely optional. They have not yet been wired into the new identity framework. By the end of the second day, that process is largely complete. The lifestyle the brain has begun to model as appropriate starts to feel like a baseline. Pulling back from it then feels like a loss, not a choice. This is why the 48-hour window is the only reliable place to intervene. Go back to your actual circumstances from 3 years back before hindsight edits it. Not in a painful way, just honestly. If you got a raise in that time, think about what you did in the days after. Did you move the money somewhere permanent before you had a chance to decide what to do with it? Or did you first notice that you could afford something you had been putting off? Most people, if they are honest, find the second thing happened. And then the raise became the thing it always becomes, a ceiling that rose to meet the spending and then stopped being visible as a raise at all. Just life. Just what things cost now. Here is a story about a man named David. He was 29, working as a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company. He had been waiting for a promotion for 14 months. When it came, it included a salary increase of $600 a month. He was genuinely pleased. He did not go out and celebrate extravagantly. He was careful with money, he thought. He knew about lifestyle inflation in the same way most people know about it, as a concept that applied to less thoughtful people than himself. In the 3 days after his raise, David did 4 things. He upgraded his gym membership because the new one had a pool and he had always meant to swim more. He signed up for a streaming service he had been sharing with his sister because it now felt awkward to keep splitting it. He told his 2 closest friends about the promotion at dinner, and they suggested going somewhere nicer than usual to celebrate, and he paid without hesitation. Because of course he should, he had just gotten a raise. And he began mentally planning a car upgrade he would make in the next year, which meant he stopped putting extra money toward his current car payment because the car would be gone soon anyway. None of those decisions felt like lifestyle inflation. They all felt like normal responses to a changed situation. 8 months later, David had saved exactly nothing from the raise. The math still worked out to roughly 0 difference in his net worth trajectory. The promotion had been real. The money had been real. The result was functionally identical to if the raise had never happened. What David did not have was a protocol, a pre-decided set of actions for the 48-hour window that would run on autopilot before his identity update completed. Here is what that protocol looks like, not as a philosophy, as a sequence of specific actions. The first action is the only one that is time-critical. Before you spend a single dollar of the new income, before you upgrade anything, sign up for anything, or tell anyone you automate the allocation, go to your bank or your payroll system. Redirect a fixed percentage of the raise into a separate account. Not all of it. You do not have to be extreme. A clean 50% of the raise increase is a number that has worked for a lot of people. If the raise is an extra $400 a month, $200 moves automatically before it is ever in your hands. You set this up before the identity update firms up, before the new version of yourself has had time to calculate what that money is supposed to feel like as spending. Automation here is not a convenience tool. It is a race against your own psychology, and you are trying to win it. The second action is a 30-day pause on all lifestyle decisions, every single one. No new subscriptions, no upgraded services, no larger apartment searches, no car research. Not because those things are wrong, but because you are not in a position to make those decisions clearly right now. The identity update is still running. Any decision that feels obvious and earned in the first week of a raise is a decision being made by a brain that is mid-update. The 30-day delay is not denial. It is deferred clarity. After 30 days, you are allowed to make any spending decision you want with the remaining 50%. But you make it from a stable place, not a charged one. The third action is silence. You do not announce the raise to your social circle in the first 48 hours. This sounds small. It is not. The moment people in your life know your income has risen, their expectations adjust. Dinners get suggested at different price points. Offers come in that assume your new status. The celebrations themselves become small spending commitments, and your brain, which is already mid-update, interprets each of these social signals as confirmation of the new identity it is building. Silence for 48 hours costs you nothing. It protects everything. Now, back to the question left open at the start of this chapter. Why do people who know about lifestyle inflation still fall into it? The answer is that knowledge operates at the conscious level, and the spending program operates below it. You cannot outthink a process that does not require your thinking to run. This is why the protocol works when understanding alone does not. The protocol creates a structural barrier between the income trigger and the identity update. It does not rely on you being more aware than the mechanism. It relies on you acting before the mechanism finishes its work. Automating the wealth allocation before the identity update completes is the only step that does not require willpower, discipline, or sustained awareness. It requires a single action in a single window. Everything else, the 30-day pause, the silence, those reinforce and protect what the automation has already secured. But the automation is the thing that runs while you are still excited, still mid-update, still in the charged state where the spending program is most powerful. Further on, you will hear a point about discipline and financial change that clashes with the familiar story. When that becomes clear, it shifts how you decide what to do next. For now, hold this. The gap is the asset. Everything you protect in the 48-hour window is not money saved. It is time purchased. And time, applied to a real gap, is the only thing that actually builds wealth. The question is not whether your next raise will come. The question is whether you will be ready for it before the clock starts. Chapter 9. Stealth Wealth is a Financial Superpower. Spending less when you earn more is not self-denial. That sounds like the kind of thinking you'd hear from someone who never had much money and decided to make a virtue of it. It is not. It is a precise description of how a specific category of wealthy people actually behave. The research on them is consistent, stubbornly repetitive across decades of data. Ignoring it requires real effort. The question this raises is an uncomfortable one. If restraint at higher income levels is a documented pattern among people who actually build wealth, why does almost no one you know follow it? Why does the person who just got promoted suddenly appear in a different car? Why does the bonus show up in someone's lifestyle before it shows up in their account balance? Something is doing that. Something below the level of deliberate choice is making those decisions before you even realize you're making them. This chapter is about that something, and about the one practical move that can quietly disable it before your next income increase arrives. Here is the open loop. There is a specific number, a dollar amount, that researchers found separates people who build lasting wealth from people who merely earn well. You will hear that number before this chapter ends. Hold onto that question. The data has always been there. Thomas Stanley spent decades interviewing millionaires across America, not the ones featured in magazines, not the founders with famous names, but the ones living quietly in ordinary neighborhoods, driving ordinary cars, wearing ordinary clothes. His findings kept producing the same portrait. The majority of people with substantial net worth were not visible. Their neighbors did not know. Their colleagues did not know. In many cases, their own family members significantly underestimated what they had accumulated. They were not hiding it out of shame or secrecy. They were simply not spending it on appearances. Stanley called it living below your means, but that phrase has been repeated so many times it has lost its edge. What he actually documented was something more precise than frugality. It was a deliberate disconnection between income and visible lifestyle. This is the pattern the research kept confirming. High earners who spent heavily on cars, clothes, houses, and social signaling consistently had low net worth relative to their income. High earners who spent modestly had disproportionately high net worth. The variable was not how much they made. The variable was how much of what they made they chose to make visible. Remember your actual circumstances from 3 years back before hindsight edits it. What did your spending look like then? What did you think you needed? And then think about how much of what you've added since. The subscriptions, the newer version, the upgrade, the slightly better option. Think about how much of that you actually chose, and how much of it arrived quietly, automatically, as income rose and the invisible floor of your lifestyle rose with it. That floor is what this chapter is about. Now meet Trevor. Trevor was a data analyst in his early 30s who had received 3 raises in 4 years. Each one felt significant. Each one disappeared. Not into savings, not into debt repayment, not into anything he could point to. It simply absorbed into his life and vanished, like water into dry ground, leaving no visible trace. After the 3rd raise, he sat down and genuinely tried to account for the money. He found a nicer gym. He found a streaming package he'd upgraded twice. He found that his grocery bill had grown in the direction of premium without a single conscious decision to shop premium. He found a parking spot closer to his office that he paid for monthly because, as he told himself at the time, he'd earned it. Nothing outrageous. Nothing he'd feel embarrassed to mention. Just a long, quiet list of small, visible upgrades that collectively consumed the entire raise before it ever compounded into anything. Trevor's conflict was not with debt. His conflict was with invisibility. He didn't know how to feel like he was doing well without looking like he was doing well. The raise felt real when people around him noticed something different. It felt abstract when they didn't. So he ran an experiment, 30 days of stealth. He decided that for 1 month he would allow his income to be completely invisible. No new purchases, no upgrades, no visible signals of the recent raise. He kept the same car. He wore the same clothes. He kept the same lunch routine he had before the increase hit his account. The raise would exist only in numbers on a screen. The first week was uncomfortable in a way he hadn't expected. Not financially uncomfortable, socially uncomfortable. A colleague mentioned a restaurant that had opened nearby and he felt a pull not toward the food but toward the participation, the belonging, the signal that he was the kind of person who went to new restaurants. He declined. Nothing happened. The world continued. By week 2, something had shifted. The discomfort had not disappeared, but it had become visible to him in a way it previously wasn't. He could feel the mechanism. He could feel the moment his mind began reaching towards spending as a way of confirming something about himself. And now that he could feel it, he could pause before following it. By week 4, Trevor had accumulated more surplus in a single month than he had in any previous 6-month period. He had not suffered. He had not gone without anything that actually mattered to him. What he had done was refuse to trade his raise for social confirmation, and that refusal, it turned out, was worth considerably more than the raise itself. The lesson is not about deprivation. Let that land before we move forward. Stealth wealth is not about refusing yourself good things. It is about refusing to let other people's perception of you become the deciding factor in how your money moves. These are completely different operations. One is a sacrifice. The other is a reclamation of authority over your own financial choices. Here is where the research sharpens into something you can use. Stanley's data pointed toward a pattern his most financially successful subjects shared. They evaluated purchases privately, not socially. They did not ask themselves, even unconsciously, what a purchase would signal to others. They asked only whether it served a function they actually valued. The question was never, will this make me look like someone who is doing well? The question was, do I want this when no one is watching? That is the test. Do you want it when no one is watching? Because lifestyle inflation is not fundamentally a financial phenomenon. It is an identity maintenance program. Your mind is running a continuous background process that monitors the gap between how you are perceived and how you feel you should be perceived given your current income. When that gap feels too wide, spending closes it. A new purchase does not just buy an object. It buys a recalibration. It updates the social display to match the internal sense of what someone at your income level is supposed to look like. The purchase is the signal is the point, and the money is simply the cost of sending it. When you practice stealth wealth, you are not just spending less. You are shutting down that maintenance program. You are telling it there is no gap to close because you are not broadcasting a number for anyone to match you against. You have made your income invisible. And invisible income does not generate social pressure to display it. Soon, you will hear a point about motivation and money that clashes with the familiar story. After that clicks, it shifts how you decide what to want. But right now, the number Stanley's research kept circling. He found that people who built real wealth over time typically saved and invested 20% or more of their income, consistently, regardless of income level. Not 20% of what was left after lifestyle. 20% taken first, invisibly, before the lifestyle had a chance to absorb it. And the key word is invisibly. The people who succeeded at this did not fight against their spending instincts every month. They removed the money from the field before the instincts activated. Stealth wealth works on both sides of the ledger. You hide the income from your social audience, and then you hide the savings from your spending instincts. Both acts of invisibility serve the same purpose. They protect accumulation from the forces that would consume it. 20%, that is the number. Not because it is magic, but because it is the threshold at which the gap between what you earn and what you display becomes wide enough to actually compound into something. Below that threshold, you are likely in maintenance mode, spending enough on visibility to keep the social display current, saving just enough to feel responsible, but never accumulating enough for the surplus to develop its own momentum. Now here is the practical weight of this. You do not need to become a different person. You do not need to find some new character trait you were not born with. The mechanism that drives lifestyle inflation is already operating below your conscious awareness. It operates precisely because it stays invisible. Stealth wealth is simply the decision to make the mechanism visible. Once you can see it reaching, you can choose not to follow it. And every time you choose not to follow it, the reach gets slightly shorter, slightly less urgent, slightly less convincing. Trevor kept the experiment going past 30 days. He stopped calling it an experiment. It became, quietly, the way he operated. 2 years later, his colleagues still did not know what he had accumulated. His car was the same. His lunch was the same. The number in his account was not the same, not even close. This is the inheritance of stealth wealth, not the money itself, though the money is real. The inheritance is the gap. The gap between what you earn and what you display is not empty space. It is not the absence of something. It is the presence of future capacity, growing quietly, out of sight, unspent and therefore undiminished. The income thermostat that once controlled you, the one that kept resetting your lifestyle upward every time income rose, does not disappear when you practice stealth wealth. It goes quiet, and a quiet thermostat is one you can eventually set yourself. Every dollar of lifestyle inflation is purchased with the currency of social approval. Stealth wealth simply refuses to make that trade. Chapter 10. Reset the thermostat or it resets you. Right now, without your permission, something is being decided for you. Not by your boss, not by the economy, by a mechanism inside you that has been running since the first paycheck you ever spent. Every raise you have received in the last 5 years has been quietly absorbed, not saved, not invested, absorbed, pulled into the baseline of what your life now costs to maintain. And here is what makes this loss specific and real. It is not a single expensive mistake you can point to. It is the accumulation of small calibrations, the streaming service added in month 3, the restaurant that became a habit, the apartment upgrade that felt modest at the time, each one invisible on its own. Together, they consumed everything the raise was supposed to free up. The gap between what you earn and what you keep is not closing. It is holding exactly still, moving upward in lockstep with your income, like a shadow that grows with the light. This chapter is about breaking that lockstep, not by earning more, by doing something most people would never consider. Refusing to trade $1 of lifestyle for $1 of approval is one kind of power. Stealth wealth, as the last chapter described, is the decision to stop purchasing status with money that could compound silently in your favor. But here is the harder question that stealth wealth alone cannot answer. What do you do when the baseline is already too high? What do you do when the invisible thermostat has already been set at a number your income barely covers and there is nothing left over to work with? Choosing not to upgrade is one move. But what if the upgrade's already happened? What if the set point is already embedded in how you live? That is a different problem, and it requires a different answer. Look back at the version of you waking up each morning from 3 years back before hindsight edits it. Seriously, pause on that. Think about the apartment, the car, the food, the subscriptions, the habits of a Tuesday evening. Now think about where you are today. The gap between those two pictures is not time passing. It is lifestyle creep made physical. It is money you earned, converted into a higher floor, and now you pay to maintain that floor every single month whether you want to or not. The question is not whether the floor rose. It almost certainly did. The question is whether you chose to raise it, or whether it rose quietly by default while you were busy with everything else. Most people discover the answer is the second one. Here is what no one tells you about lifestyle inflation. It does not feel like a choice. It feels like a series of completely reasonable responses to your circumstances. Of course, you upgraded the apartment when you got the raise, you deserved it. Of course, you started eating out more, you were working harder. Of course, the car payment grew, it was time. None of these felt like the thermostat moving. They felt like life adjusting naturally. But that is precisely what makes the mechanism so effective. It disguises itself as common sense. And by the time you notice what it has done, the new baseline feels non-negotiable. It is not. This is where Trevor enters the picture. Trevor was 31, working in logistics coordination in Columbus, Ohio. Not a dramatic salary, but steady, about $64,000 a year, which had grown from $49,000 over 4 years. He had received 2 meaningful raises in that window and had essentially nothing saved beyond a $400 emergency fund. He was not careless with money. He tracked his spending in a spreadsheet. He knew roughly where his money went, but somehow, knowing where it went did not change where it went. His rent had moved from $920 a month to $1,340. His car payment had replaced an older, paid-off vehicle. His grocery and food delivery spending had roughly doubled since he started working from home. He told himself each of these was justified, and each of them individually was. Together, they had consumed the entirety of a $15,000 annual income increase. Trevor did not feel rich. He did not feel poor. He felt stuck. A coworker mentioned something offhand about a financial experiment she had read about, a 90-day reset. Not a budget, not a restriction, a deliberate investigation. She framed it the way she had heard it framed, not as sacrifice but as data collection. You are not punishing yourself, she said. You are simply asking your own life a question. Trevor was skeptical. But he was also tired of the spreadsheet showing him truths he could not act on. He ran the experiment. The structure was straightforward. For 90 days, Trevor held every discretionary spending category at a fixed, lower number. Not zero, not uncomfortable, but deliberately less than his current baseline. His food and delivery budget dropped from around $900 a month to $450. Not by cooking miserable meals. By cooking deliberately, planning the week on Sunday, and treating restaurant spending as occasional rather than constant. His entertainment budget dropped to $80 a month, chosen in advance. He did not cancel everything. He canceled the things he could not remember choosing. He stayed in his apartment. He kept his car. He was not living like a monk. But he was living at a lower set point than he had occupied in 3 years. What happened to the money surprised him more than the money itself. In 90 days, Trevor accumulated $4,200 he had not seen coming, not because he earned more, because he stopped absorbing. He watched his net worth move for the first time in a way that felt like motion rather than noise. More than the number, something shifted in what he thought the experiment actually was. He had walked into it expecting restriction. It did not feel that way. After the first 2 weeks, it felt like clarity. The baseline he had been defending, the one that felt non-negotiable, turned out to be almost entirely negotiable. He had been spending money to maintain a version of his life he had not consciously decided to live. That is the thing about the thermostat. You never remember turning it up. You just remember feeling cold once and adjusting. Now here is what the experiment revealed that matters more than Trevor's $4,000. The 90-day period did something to his sense of normal that a single month could not have done. 1 month of reduced spending is endurance. It is white-knuckling through a period you are eager to end. But something different happens at the 90-day mark. The new baseline starts to feel ordinary. Not joyless, ordinary. The restaurants he used to visit weekly no longer pulled at him the way they once did. The delivery apps on his phone felt less necessary. His relationship to the cost of a Tuesday evening had recalibrated. He had not become a different person. He had simply reset the thermostat deliberately, consciously, to a lower number. And because he reset it, the gap between his income and his spending opened in a way it had never opened before. Here is the open loop this chapter introduced at the beginning, and now it closes. The question was what you do when the thermostat is already set too high. When the upgrades have already happened and the baseline is already embedded. The answer is not willpower. It is not a budget with 20 categories and color-coded columns. It is a temporary, deliberate reduction, not forever, not as punishment, but as a recalibration of what your nervous system registers as normal. Once 90 days have passed, the new number is no longer an abstraction. It is lived experience. And future increases, the next raise, the next income jump, do not land on top of an already inflated floor. They land on top of a floor you chose. Later on, you will hear a point about motivation and financial discipline that clashes with the familiar story. Once you grasp that turn, it shifts how you act every time an increase in income arrives. But for now, understand this. A lifestyle reset is not deprivation. This is the principle most people miss because they frame the reset through the lens of what they are giving up. That framing is wrong. You are not giving anything up. You are renegotiating your relationship with a baseline that was set by circumstance, not by choice. You are measuring from a lower starting point so that the next increase compounds against a gap that actually exists, rather than disappearing silently into maintenance costs for a lifestyle you drifted into. The thermostat metaphor described an automatic mechanism that pulls your spending up toward your income. That mechanism is real, but it runs on what feels normal. And what feels normal is not fixed. It is learned. Which means it can be unlearned, at least partially, at least enough to create the breathing room that lets the gap finally open. Trevor ran the experiment once. After the 90 days, he did not go back to his previous baseline. Not entirely. He added some things back, a couple of subscriptions, occasional dining out that was now a decision rather than a default. But he never fully returned to the floor he had been defending before the experiment. His net worth grew by $11,000 in the following year, not because his income changed, because his floor did. You have one question to sit with now, not a rhetorical one. What floor are you defending that you never actually chose? Chapter 11. Future wealth competes with present identity. Saving money is not a discipline problem. That sounds like an excuse someone makes when they cannot stick to a budget. It is not. It is a precise description of what is actually happening when you choose a new pair of shoes over a transfer to your investment account. Your brain is not failing to exercise willpower. It is doing exactly what brains do when one option feels real and the other one doesn't. The present is vivid. The future is a rumor. And you cannot compete with vivid using a spreadsheet. This chapter is about how to make the future as loud in your nervous system as the present already is, so that building wealth stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like the more urgent choice. Not through motivation, not through discipline, through psychology applied in the right direction. That question is still suspended between chapters in the background. What floor are you defending that you never actually chose? Hold that for a moment, because the answer leads somewhere specific. And that somewhere is the reason future wealth keeps losing. Here is the open loop. There is a single sentence, one that takes about 4 seconds to say, That has the power to interrupt a spending impulse faster than any budget rule you have ever written. That answer will be yours before this section wraps. First, you need to understand why the fight is so uneven to begin with. When you consider buying something right now, a dinner out, a new jacket, an upgrade you have been eyeing for weeks, the part of your brain that registers identity threat activates in about 200 milliseconds. 200. Before you have consciously formed a thought about whether you want it or can afford it, your nervous system has already calculated whether owning it would protect the version of you that you are committed to presenting to the world. The response is pre-verbal. It is faster than reason. Now consider what wealth building asks you to feel instead. In 30 years, this money will compound into something significant. In 10 years, you will have options you do not have today. These statements are true. They are also nearly meaningless to the part of your brain running the calculation. That part does not process 30 years from now as real. It processes now. It processes the room you are standing in, the people around you, the image of yourself you need to maintain in this moment. The gap between those two timescales is not a character flaw. It is the structure of human perception. And knowing that matters because it stops you from blaming yourself and starts you asking the right question. The right question is not how do I get more discipline? The right question is how do I make the future feel present? Return to the version of you waking up each morning from 3 years back before hindsight edits it. Not your net worth, just your daily life. The specific apartment, the specific job, the specific social circle you were inside. Can you feel the texture of that period? The things that felt urgent then, the things you spent money on to feel settled in that version of your life, how real do they feel to you now? Some of them are probably invisible to you today. Some of them you cannot believe mattered so much. The future self you are building right now will look back on your current spending identity with the same mild bewilderment. The question is whether that future self will also have the financial weight to look back with. Most people never feel that future self as a real person. They feel them as a hope, or an obligation, or a vague improvement of the present self. But hope has no competitive weight against identity pressure. An obligation just feels like guilt. A vague improvement does not generate the neurological signal that says this is real, this is here, this matters now. What generates that signal is specificity, concrete detail. The brain trusts what it can see, hear, and smell. So give it something to see. This is where Trevor comes in. Trevor was 31 years old, working in supply chain management for a mid-sized distributor in the Midwest. He was earning $63,000 a year, more than he had ever made, and he was saving almost none of it. Every time his income went up, his expenses followed within about 4 months. New furniture, a better car payment, nicer restaurants. He was not reckless. He was careful with his money in the sense that he knew where it went. He just could not feel a strong reason to send it somewhere else. Future retirement felt like a word. Present comfort felt like Tuesday. A financial coach gave Trevor an unusual assignment. Not a budget, not a savings target, an essay. Trevor was asked to write 2 pages from the perspective of himself at 52. Not a fantasy version, a specific, detailed, lived version. Where does he wake up? What does the bedroom look like? What does he do at 7 in the morning? What does he worry about? What does he not worry about anymore? What did the choices at 31 cost him or give him? Trevor thought the exercise was strange. He did it anyway in about 40 minutes one night after dinner. He wrote about waking up in a house he owned outright. He wrote about a Monday morning where no alarm sounded because he had stopped taking meetings before 10. He wrote about a daughter in college whose tuition he had saved for without debt. And then, almost accidentally, he wrote a line he did not expect. He wrote that 52-year-old Trevor was proud of 31-year-old Trevor, not for being perfect, but for being the first version of himself who decided that the gap could close. He read that line back. He did not analyze it. He just felt it. Within a week, his savings transfer went up by $400 a month, not because he suddenly had discipline, because the future person had a face. Do not rush past what just happened there. The essay did not give Trevor new information. He already knew compound interest existed. He already knew that spending today cost him later. Knowledge was never the gap. The gap was that future Trevor was an abstraction, and present comfort was immediate. The essay converted future Trevor from an abstraction into a person. Persons have competitive weight. Abstractions do not. This is the visualization protocol. It works not because visualization is mystical, but because the brain responds to vivid simulation the same way it responds to direct experience. Research in behavioral psychology has shown that writing or speaking in detail about a future scenario activates emotional processing centers in the same regions that process real memory. You are not imagining. You are rehearsing a memory that has not happened yet. And rehearsed memories feel like something worth protecting. Here is how you run it. Set aside 20 minutes. No phone. Write in first-person present tense as if you are already in the life you are building 10, 15, or 20 years out, not the financial numbers, the texture. What time do you wake up? What does the space around you feel like? What are you not carrying that you carry now? Who is with you? What did you stop spending money on, and what did that decision buy you? Write until you hit a specific moment of feeling, not a vague sense of satisfaction. An actual concrete feeling, relief, ease, pride, stillness. When you hit it, stop. Read that line back out loud. That line is now a signal. Write it on something physical. Put it somewhere you see it before you spend. That signal is the answer to the open loop from earlier. The sentence that interrupts a spending impulse faster than any budget rule is the one you write yourself, in your own words, about your own future life. Not a principle, not a rule, a voice. Your future voice telling your present self what the decision actually costs in human terms, not dollars. Here is why this works against identity spending specifically. Identity spending happens because the present self needs to feel coherent and recognized. When you buy something to maintain your lifestyle floor, you are protecting a self-image that exists right now. The future self you have written has a self-image too, and it is a more durable one because it is built on choices, not signals. When both self-images are vivid, they compete. When only the present one is vivid, there is no contest. This is the reveal the argument has been leaning toward through each step of the argument. Making future wealth psychologically concrete gives it competitive weight. Not motivational weight, competitive weight. You are not trying to feel inspired. You are trying to give your future self the same neurological standing that your present self already has. Once they are equally real, the choice changes. Not always, but often enough to move the numbers. The thermostat running your spending is set to a temperature someone else chose, advertisers, social circles, the ambient pressure of visible consumption. But a thermostat is a device that responds to input. It is not a law, and the input it is most responsive to is the one you give it most often. Right now, you give it daily data from your present life and almost no data from your future life. That ratio is the problem. Change the ratio and the set point moves. As this book keeps moving, you will hear a point about willpower and financial change that clashes with the familiar story. When that point settles, it shifts how you act, not just how you think. For now, the work is this. Write the essay, find the line, say it out loud. Make the future a person who is already in the room with you every time you open your wallet. The floor you have been defending was set before you understood what you were defending. The question is whether you will keep defending it, or finally choose the elevation yourself. Chapter 12. Your net worth is your real status symbol. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen left behind the same evidence. Not in its buildings, not in its borders, but in what its people chose to display. The symbols changed: land, livestock, garments, carriages, watches, cars, but the impulse behind the display never did. Human beings have always used visible possessions to signal their place in the tribe. This is ancient. This is wired. And for most of human history, it worked. The person with the most visible resources usually did have the most actual resources, but something cracked in that equation. At some point, credit, leasing, and installment payments made it possible to broadcast a wealth you did not own. The signal and the reality split apart. Now you are living in a world where the most convincing performance of wealth is the furthest from the truth, which means you have been competing in a game where winning looks exactly like losing. That ends here. You chose the elevation. That was the last chapter's final question. This one is about what elevation actually looks like from the inside, once you stop measuring it with other people's eyes. Here is the open loop you need to sit with as you move through this chapter. There is a specific feeling, a quiet, particular kind of satisfaction, that most people you know have never experienced even once in their adult financial lives. Not because it requires extraordinary income, not because it requires sacrifice so severe it hollows you out, but because it requires a different object of pride. Hold that thought. You will know exactly what that feeling is before this chapter ends. Think about what you used to do the week after a raise came through. Not what you told yourself you would do, what you actually did. Maybe the number in your bank account ticked upward. Maybe you felt good for a day, 2 days, a weekend. And then something subtle happened. The apartment felt a little smaller. The car felt a little older. The clothes felt a little less right. Nothing changed in your physical surroundings. But the raised income created a raised expectation, and that expectation looked around at your current life and filed a quiet complaint. So you answered it. A nicer dinner. A weekend trip you would not have booked the month before. A few things from a website you had been browsing. Small, each one, reasonable individually, but added together they absorbed the raise almost entirely before the next 90 days were out. This is the thermostat, the same mechanism you met in the first pages of this book. It reads your income, it sets a spending temperature to match, and it works without your permission or awareness. You did not choose this, it chose you. The cost is not just money, that is almost secondary. The real cost is that your net worth, the actual number that represents your financial life, barely moved. You earned more. You spent more. The gap between what comes in and what stays closed itself automatically, like a wound that refuses to heal because something keeps reopening it. Here is what that gap costs you in concrete terms. Not philosophy, not metaphor. Every $100 per month that evaporates into lifestyle maintenance, rather than compounding over 10 years at a modest return, is roughly $17,000 you do not have at the end of that decade. Not once. Every $100. Monthly. Every time the thermostat clicks on. You have been leaving money on the floor of your own life and calling the act of picking it up indulgent. Now consider a different possibility. There is a woman named Renata. She is 31 years old. She works in logistics management for a regional shipping company and makes a decent salary, not extraordinary, but solid. 3 years ago, she got a promotion and a raise that bumped her income by nearly 20%. Everyone around her expected to see the evidence. A better car, a nicer neighborhood, dinners out more often. Renata had always wanted those things too. But that year, she had been paying quiet attention to something. She had been watching her net worth number, the total of what she owned minus what she owed, and she had noticed it barely moved despite years of working hard. So when the raise came, she made one private decision. She let her life look exactly the same as it had before. She did not announce this. She did not perform frugality for applause. She simply did not upgrade. 12 months later, her net worth had grown more in that single year than in the previous 4 years combined. And the feeling she described was not deprivation. She said it felt like watching a plant you had been accidentally overwatering finally take root. Like something that had been fighting upstream was now moving with the current. Nobody at her office knew. Her friends assumed she was the same as before. She was not. She was building something real and invisible and entirely hers. That feeling Renata described, that quiet, private satisfaction with a number that only you can see, that is the feeling most people in your life have never experienced. That is the open loop closed. Here is the mirror moment. Think about the last status signal you purchased, not the last thing you bought. The last thing you bought because of how it would register to someone else, how it would photograph, how it would read at the table or in the parking lot or in the group chat. You know what it is. Now ask yourself what your net worth was the month you bought it, not the exact number, just whether it was growing, whether the gap between your income and your spending was widening or narrowing. Most people cannot answer that question, not because they are careless, because they were never taught to care about it. They were taught to care about the signal. Here is what changes when you make the internal shift that Renata made. Status, the real psychological need underneath it, does not disappear. You do not stop being human. You redirect where you find it. Instead of scanning your closet or your driveway for evidence of your standing, you check your net worth. You find the number, and if it is higher than it was 90 days ago, you feel something. A specific thing. Pride without performance. Satisfaction with no audience required. This is the complete inversion. Every piece of visible status you have ever purchased gave you a feeling that someone else had to witness to feel real. The car is only the car until someone sees it in the lot. The watch only registers when someone glances at your wrist. The apartment only lands when a friend walks through the door and says the right thing. You have been renting your sense of self-worth by the impression. You have been paying for applause in a theater that is always closing early. Net worth is different. Net worth does not need a witness. It sits there. It grows. It compounds not just financially but psychologically, because every month you look at that number and see it rise, you reinforce the identity of someone who is genuinely building something. Not performing something, building it. And unlike the car, unlike the watch, unlike the apartment that impresses guests but drains your account, the net worth compounds. The number you have tomorrow is built on the number you have today. Status through visible consumption resets every few years when the thing ages or goes out of fashion. Status through balance sheet growth resets every day, and each reset leaves you with more than the day before. You are not behind. You are repositioning. The people around you who look the most financially established are, in many cases, running the fastest just to stay in place. You have watched that race for long enough to know you do not want to win it. The new game has different rules. In the new game, the richest person at the table is the one with the highest savings rate, not the highest car payment. In the new game, the most impressive number is the one nobody at the table can see. In the new game, your worth is not performed. It is compounding, and it is already yours. You just have to stop spending it to prove something to someone who is not paying as much attention as you think. The only status that compounds is the one no one else can take credit for noticing. Chapter 13. Set the thermostat, don't be set by it. You already know something changed in you while reading this book. You can feel it, a kind of friction when you reach for the thing you used to reach for automatically. But here is what happens at exactly this point for most people. The recognition fades. The old pattern reasserts itself like a tide coming back in, quiet and patient. 3 months later, you are standing in the same place, wondering what happened to all that clarity. Not because you failed, because recognition alone is not enough. The thermostat does not care that you understand it. It will run its program whether you are watching or not. So the real question is not whether you now see the mechanism. The question is whether you are willing to become the person who sets it. That is different work. It is less comfortable than insight, and it lasts longer than motivation. This chapter is about that work. The word status closed the last chapter for a reason. The only status that compounds is the one no one else can take credit for noticing. Hold that. What you are about to do, what this chapter is actually asking of you, is invisible to everyone around you. No one will applaud it. No one will see the number you set. And that invisibility is precisely where the power lives. Go back to the beginning of this book for a moment. The thermostat. You were introduced to it as the thing working against you, a hidden regulator, a program running beneath your decisions, eating every raise before you could keep it. You watched it work in your own life. You probably felt the recognition in your chest when it was first described. That quiet, slightly uncomfortable feeling of being named. The thermostat was the enemy, something that happened to you. It is not the enemy. It never was. A thermostat is a tool. The problem was never the mechanism. The problem was who was setting it. Turn back to 3 years ago before memory softens it, not in the abstract but specifically. What did a full paycheck feel like? What did you believe you could do with money back then, and what did you actually do? The gap between those two answers is the thermostat in action. It was running. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. You just never designed it. Someone else did. Ads, comparisons, childhood wiring, every apartment you ever visited that made yours feel small. That is who set your thermostat. A crowd of influences you never voted for. Setting it yourself is the entire point. Here is where Trevor comes in. Trevor is 31. He works in logistics management, earns a salary he is genuinely proud of, and for 4 years ran the same pattern this book has been describing. Every raise got absorbed. Every bonus disappeared into things that felt necessary the moment he bought them, and invisible 6 weeks later. He was not careless. He was not irresponsible. He was simply operating on a thermostat someone else had calibrated, a setting that said, roughly, spend to the ceiling of what feels normal for a person at your level. One afternoon, Trevor sat down with a piece of paper and did something that sounds almost embarrassingly simple. He wrote a number, not a budget, not a spending plan, a single number representing what he would keep from each paycheck as a non-negotiable before lifestyle touched it. He did not calculate it from a formula. He arrived at it by asking one question. What amount, if I moved it automatically to a separate account every month, would feel like a real decision rather than a symbolic gesture? That question matters. Symbolic gestures are easy. They do not change behavior because they do not cost enough attention. A real decision has weight. Trevor picked a number with weight. He set the transfer for the day after payday. He did not tell anyone. He did not post about it. He did not wait to feel ready, because the part of him that ran the old thermostat would never feel ready. He just said it, and then he waited to see what the rest of his life would organize itself around. The first month was uncomfortable. Not dramatic, uncomfortable. The old reaching for spending that used to feel automatic now met a smaller space. He noticed himself justifying purchases he would previously have made without blinking. That noticing is the whole mechanism at work in reverse. When money is not infinitely available, decisions become visible again. Within 3 months, his lifestyle had reorganized, not around deprivation, around the new ceiling. The thermostat still ran. It just ran at a setting he had chosen. Here is the open loop this chapter introduced quietly, and now is the time to close it. The question was not just whether you see the mechanism. The question was whether you are willing to become the person who sets it. What does that actually require? It requires one thing that almost no financial advice tells you, because it is not a financial act. It is an identity act. You must decide, in a very concrete and non-abstract way, that your income exists to build your life rather than to perform it. That the money flowing through your hands is a resource for a future you are constructing, not a signal you are broadcasting to people who will forget what you were wearing by Tuesday. That decision changes what feels like normal, and what feels like normal is the thermostat. When Trevor said his number, he was not doing math. He was making a declaration about who he was becoming. He was telling the automated program at the base of his financial behavior that it no longer had sole authority. He was not removing the thermostat. He was placing his hand on the dial for the first time. You can do this today, not tomorrow, not when the next raise comes, not when the situation feels cleaner. Today. Because waiting for a better moment is what the old thermostat wants. It is patient. It knows that motivation fades and that the moment you close this chapter, the noise of daily life will return. It is counting on that. You pick a number. A real one, not a comfortable one. You set the transfer before spending gets a vote. You let your lifestyle find its new floor. And then you watch something surprising happen, not immediately, but within weeks. The sense that you are behind, that feeling of running and not gaining ground, begins to loosen, not because you have more, because the gap is finally closing instead of regenerating. The gap was never about income. It was about the setting. And now you know the setting is yours to change. This chapter sits one before the last, and that is deliberate. What you are about to encounter in the final pages of this book is not another technique. It is a crossing. The thermostat does not go away after you set it consciously. It will still pull. Old spending patterns have the strength of years behind them, and they do not vanish because you understand their origin. But the person who set the thermostat deliberately, even once, even imperfectly, is no longer the same as the person who never touched the dial. That distinction is the whole distance between the life you have and the life you are going to build. The thermostat does not go away. But now, for the first time, you are the one who decides what it reads. What does it mean to live at the setting you chose, fully, on purpose, without apology? And what does the person who does that look like 1 year from now? Chapter 14. The next raise goes to your future self first. Every human culture that has ever accumulated anything figured out the same principle eventually. The details changed. The languages changed. The tools changed. But underneath all of it, in every civilization that built something lasting, the same understanding surfaced. The portion set aside before you live on the rest is the portion that survives, not the portion saved after desire is satisfied. Before, the people who understood this did not live smaller lives. They lived different ones. And now, after everything you have heard in this book, after every mechanism you have seen named and exposed, you arrive at the final door. You know what the program is. You know how it runs. The only question left is whether you walk through and what you do in the first hour after you do. That last question asked you to picture the person who lives at a chosen setting, fully, on purpose, without apology. Hold that image for a moment. This chapter is not going to ask you to imagine that person anymore. This chapter is going to make you that person with one decision made once that runs while you sleep. Here is the open loop that matters. There is a single reason most people who understand everything in this book still do not change their financial outcome. They understand it completely and nothing moves. You will see exactly why before this chapter ends. Picture the version of you waking up each morning from 3 years back, before hindsight edits it. Not the version of you with more problems or fewer problems, but the version with a different number in your bank account and a different idea of what your life was supposed to look like. Think about the raises that arrived between then and now. Think about where those raises went. You do not have to be specific. The general shape of the answer is enough. If you are like almost everyone who will ever hear these words, the raises arrived and the expenses rose to meet them. The gap between what you earn and what you keep stayed roughly the same. That gap is not a coincidence. It is the thermostat doing its job. You met that thermostat in the first pages of this book. It was the enemy then. It was the thing running underneath your conscious intentions, pulling your spending upward every time your income climbed, keeping you at a temperature that felt normal even when normal was costing you a decade of options. You have seen it exposed, circuit by circuit, across every chapter since. And now comes the moment this whole book was moving toward. The thermostat does not have to be the enemy anymore. You can set it, deliberately, before the next raise arrives. And the setting you choose can point in a direction your past self never aimed. Here is what actually happens when a raise arrives for someone who has not done this work. The number changes in the direct deposit. There is a moment, maybe a day, maybe a week, where the extra money sits in the account and the person tells themselves they will be smart with it this time. Then identity activates. The self-image built over years, the one that knows what a person at this income level drives, wears, eats, lives in, begins to search for its reflection in the world. And it finds it. A new subscription here. A slightly better version of something there. A dinner out that used to feel like a splurge and now just feels like Tuesday. None of these decisions feel like decisions. They feel like adjustments. They feel like arriving at the correct temperature, and within 90 days the raise is invisible, not spent in one moment, dissolved quietly into the texture of ordinary life. Willpower does not stop this. Hear that clearly and hear it before you try to argue against it, because the argument itself is the program talking. Willpower is a conscious resource. The spending identity is not conscious. You cannot fight an automatic process with a manual one and expect the manual one to win consistently. The program runs faster than your resolve. Every time you try to override it by thinking harder, you are bringing a deliberate tool to an automatic fight. And deliberate always loses to automatic when they meet at the moment of temptation. Meet Trevor. He is 31, works in logistics, and has heard some version of this idea before. He read a book about saving once 3 years ago. He agreed with it completely. He intended to apply it. Then a raise came, and then another, and the intention got deferred. Now he earns more than he ever has, and his savings rate is roughly what it was at 26. He is not bad with money. He is not undisciplined in other areas of his life. He is someone whose spending identity updates faster than his saving intentions do, and he has been losing that race without knowing it was a race. Then, one evening, he gets an email from HR. A 4% raise, effective next pay period. He feels the familiar warmth of it. He also, for the first time, feels the familiar dread, because he has just finished hearing everything you have heard, and he knows what happens next if he lets it happen. He does not tell his partner that night. He does not mention it to anyone. He opens his bank's app before he closes his eyes and finds the automatic transfer screen. He sets a recurring transfer, the precise dollar amount of the after-tax raise, to move to a separate account on the same day his paycheck arrives, every pay period, until he says otherwise. He does not set a reminder to do it later. He does not plan to calculate the right amount tomorrow. He does this now, before the raise feels real, before his self-image has had time to absorb the new number and decide what it deserves. He sets the transfer and closes the app and goes to sleep. In the morning, his life looks identical. It will keep looking identical. And that is exactly the point. The program cannot update to a number it never sees in the spendable account. This is the revelation that closes the loop. The reason people who understand all of this still fail to change is not lack of knowledge, and it is not lack of will. It is timing. They make the decision to save after the raise has already registered as income, after the identity has had 24 hours to begin calculating what this new level looks like, after the thermostat has already started to read the new temperature as normal. By then, saving feels like deprivation. By then, the allocation requires willpower, because you are taking something from a self-image that already claimed it. But if you move the money before the identity reads the new number, before the lifestyle has a chance to expand, there is nothing to take. You are not depriving anyone. You are simply introducing your future self to the raise before your present identity could spend the invitation. Automation moves faster than identity. That is the whole principle. That is the thing every chapter of this book was building toward. The gap that never closed was not closing because every tool you tried required a conscious decision at the moment of temptation. Automation requires one decision, made once, in a calm moment, before the temptation exists. One deliberate action outruns 10,000 future automatic ones. You do not need a perfect plan. You do not need the exact right account or the exactly correct percentage. You need a number, any number that represents some portion of your next income gain, and you need a transfer that moves that number on payday before you see it, touch it, or think about it. You can refine the amount later. You can optimize the destination later. But the protocol has to exist before the raise arrives, because once it arrives, you are already behind. The person you imagined at the end of the last chapter, the one living fully at the setting they chose, that person did not get there by wanting it more. They got there by making one automated decision that their present self could not undo easily in a weak moment. They built a small piece of infrastructure that served their future self before their present self could object. Your thermostat is no longer the enemy. Set it today.